Hi, in this podcast I talk about aspects of our lives that can be potentially overwhelming and sometimes things we all face. What do we do? How do we cope? And are these a threat to our very selves? In this podcast I point to a way out, a way to overcome some of these struggles and some of these challenges. I hope you enjoy it and thank you for listening. On Wednesday we spoke about the Milgram experiment, which was very interesting. When I started reading about that stuff, it was quite fascinating. Usually, as part of the where was I with my story? Okay, yes. So if you go online and you search the Milgram experiment, something that usually comes up in conjunction with it is a thing called the Asch conformity experiment. Now, the Asch conformity experiment was an experiment that was devised in the very early 50s, like 1950, 1951, around there. And what he did was he got... There are some queries around the experiment because it was done in the 50s, because it was done so long ago, but I still think that there's some relevance. And what he did is he got guys that were the same age, men that were the same age, at the same university, in the same institution, and used them as his test batch. So it wasn't a random selection of people, it was quite a specific selection of people. Kind of like a peer group experiment. So, if you're in school with your school buddies, that kind of thing. And what he did was he had 3 lines on a board of varying lengths. And then in his test groups in private, the people were asked to identify which lines were longer and which lines were smaller. So when he did the experiment one-on-one, it's quite a simple, basic experiment. He got less than 1% of people got 100%. Everybody got it right. I think the only people who didn't get it right were the ones who didn't have their glasses on that day. That one poor guy. So that was his control batch. Then what he did is he had he did it in groups of 8, and also varied the groups, but generally in groups of 8. And then he would have 7 of those guys were working with him in the experiment, and then there would be the odd one out of the experiment. And it's called the Asch conformity experiment. And what would happen, they would do the first ones, and then everybody in the group would give the right answer. And then they would start to give the wrong answer. So out of the 18 questions around string length of a piece of string on a board that he gave, and for 12 of those, the group would knowingly give the wrong answer. 35% of the time, that's 1/3 of the time, people conformed with the group, even although they knew that the answer was wrong. So if the group was saying the medium piece of string was actually the longest piece of string, 35% went along with what the group was saying. After the experiment, now again you would think this is the 1950s, and this stuff is wired into our brains. Community, when he did the debriefing of the guys after the experiment to find out why did they go with the group? Why did they conform? Most of them said that they knew the answer was wrong, but they didn't want to cause a disruption in the group dynamic. And there was a percentage, I think it was, the statistic he quoted was 25% were happy to go against the stream. And, while I was reading that and while I was thinking about it, there are people who like to be right, and are quite happy to get affirmation out of something like that. But irrespective, the 35% of people complied with the experiment. When they had, again, very similar to the Milgram experiment, when they had an ally in the room with them, that statistic went way down. Now, I'm really, you'll have to go check the statistic yourself because I can't remember it. I think the compliance went down to about 10% when there was, from 35 to 10, when there was an ally in the group. This is completely fascinating for me because you have people that are in a study that will willingly go against the evidence of what it is that they're seeing to comply with the group. And if you go back and you look at the pictures, it really is from the 50s. The guys are all in university, they're all wearing jackets with ties, with a thick horn-rimmed frame, glasses, and I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, these are conservative guys from way back when. But people conform. People will go with the decision of the group that they're in. Now, I thought the importance of having allies was very, very significant for me in the Milgram experiment. And it's exactly the same thing is being proved again in a different kind of experiment. Something that isn't asking for such drastic results. But the people that you surround yourself with are going to be the ones that are going to save you, are going to be the ones that are going to help you, are going to be the ones that are going to guide you. Now, I heard about when I first did my training many, many years ago, the very first counseling course that I did, the presenter of the course told us about an experiment called the Da Vinci experiment. And the Da Vinci experiment is also quite fascinating. What it was, the way that he explained it to us as part of the course, there were 100 people that were doing training, and they were all told to break into groups of 5. 100 people told to break into groups of 5. And what they found was that like people connected with each other in that random group of 100 people. Certain types of people are attracted to each other. And we were, if we were 15 in that group, I think maybe we were 12. We were a small group that was doing the counseling course, and he asked us to do the same thing. I can't remember if he had told us the story before or after. I can't remember specifically. To break up into groups of, I think it was 3, because we were such a small group. Now, from my own perspective, I don't like those kind of things. I'm not a person who is a joiner, and I like to join groups. When people start saying split off, immediately my eyes are like rolling into the back of my head, and I'm like, oh my God, really, do we have to do this lame exercise? And as a result of my perspective on the way that I perceive groups and joining of groups, there were 3 or 4 other guys who had exactly the same perspective as me, and we ended up in a group together because they didn't want to join it. Everybody else was like, woo! And they all joined a group, and we were left like sitting watching these idiots like sheep flocking together in little groups, and we ended up in a group together. Now I haven't gone and investigated the specifics of this experiment, but just from my own personal experience, it's quite interesting how the group of us ended up together and the people that were in that group with me. And I can't help but think that the people that get drawn into my life, how sincere are they about working on recovery? How sincere are they about staying sober? How sincere are they about their program and what it is that they were doing? As it turns out, the one guy in our little group that we joined in, I think he had just made his year, and sometime after that went out and drank and used again. The other guys in the group stayed around for a significant amount of time. Which has implications, because if I want something, if I have an objective and if I have a goal, if I want to achieve something, that means I need to go out of my way to source what it is that I need. Which is why you will always hear in AA and NA, nobody's going to come and ask you to sponsor them. You have to go and find a sponsor. I have a tendency when I sponsor people, because I try that, waiting around, because for me sponsoring people is important. It's part of my recovery. It's something that I do to carry the message, something that I do because that's what it says in step 12, is that we must help people. So I will go and find people and ask them if they have a sponsor or if they want to sponsor. That's what I actively do. But I don't know how commonplace that is. It's never happened to me. Nobody has ever, in the years that I've been in the program, come up to me and said, listen, I'd like to sponsor you. I've always had to take that step on my own. The same applies for meeting attendance. Especially here in Joburg, some of the meetings are really big. I was at a meeting last night. There were 50, 60 people there. Nobody's going to notice if I'm there or if I'm not there. Unless I'm with my clique, with my guys, with my friends that I hang around with. And then it's also always going to be a question of, are they going to even phone and find out where I am or what has happened to me? And this is a very stark reality of 12-step recovery. There are many, many, many people who need to be there. But the people that you find there are the people who want to be there. And the people who are willing to make some sacrifices in the pursuit of achieving an objective. And that is consistent meeting attendance. So one of the recommendations, one of the suggestions that have been around AA meetings and NA meetings forever is that when you get out of treatment, 90 meetings in 90 days. Go to 90 meetings in 90 days. It will be extremely beneficial for you. And that's something that each individual has to make a decision about themselves. Will it help you? Absolutely. Will it be beneficial? You have absolutely no idea. I've done it. I've done it a couple of times. I've taken people and done it with them who are new in the program, and I've always benefited out of that experience. So we have this part of us. There's something that is in our way that we view the world and that we engage with the world. And I can't say for sure that a person is like this or a person is not like this. That this person is we're going to do the Ash conformity experiment on this person, and this person is going to behave in this way, or this person is going to behave that way. I have no idea how I'm going to respond under those circumstances. Like in the Milgram experiment, if you stick me in front of an electric shocker machine, what am I going to do? How am I going to respond to a situation like that? It's something that I always that I have a habit of mentioning, and I'll mention it again is if you look at something like a communist society, how far are they willing to push their agenda through and implement rules? If you look at the countries that are under those kind of rules and under those kind of systems and under those kind of dictatorships, they go to extraordinary lengths and the people conform and they go along. So my internal struggle is with my mind and how am I going to respond to environments that I come into contact with. Let's say for example, and this is something that has fascinated me. I mean, I'll never forget the first time I thought about it, and I was like, wow. No bank that I have ever been to has ever asked me for my matric certificate when I've asked to borrow money. Not ever. They didn't want to know if I had a university degree, what my qualifications were, nothing. They don't care. They just want to know if I can pay back the money, if I can provide them with balance sheets, if I have resources, if when they ask questions I can answer the questions that they want. Now, anybody who's been in business or run their own business or started a business will know that starting a business is it's a high risk situation that you go into. It's very nice when you read all of these business books and they say, listen, if you start a business, make sure that you don't start a business with your own money. Right? That's a great idea, and if you can do it, fantastic. But sometimes that's not an opportunity. You've got a little bit of money or however much money you've got, and you have to put money in. Many times if you speak to investors, they want to know what your investment in what you're starting up here is. They're not just gonna give you money if they know that you're not somehow committed to what is going to take place in the future. How committed are you to this business, or are you just trying to borrow money? So any venture is always going to be a very high risk set of circumstances. And I will draw a comparison and I will draw an equation to finishing treatment in the treatment center and walking out of the gate there. The future is uncertain. You don't know exactly what it is that is going to happen, which is why I get very nervous when people are so like, I'm going to make this and I'm going to do this, and nobody will ever make me drink again. That's like saying, you know what, I'm going to start this business and there's absolutely no way that I'm going to fail. And then go and have a look at the statistics of how many people start businesses and how many people don't make it. There is not a huge percentage of people that make it when they leave treatment. Interestingly, that number jumps significantly for people who stay a second month. I know it sounds like a bit of a sales pitch on my side, but we've looked at the numbers. And part of the reason for that is the reason that the point that I'm trying to make with this discussion is you have this venture. So let's say in starting my business, I use my house as collateral. In this day and age, unfortunately, the bank doesn't want your house. I've tried to use my house as collateral. They're only too happy to use your house as collateral if it's paid off. But if you still owe money on your house, because their thinking is, you know what, if things go belly up and we need to get our money back, that first means we have to sell your house, and then whoever else gets their money before we get our money. They're not interested in that procedure. You know, I always thought that if you have an investment in property, that it's quite a secure thing if it's paid for. So you go into a venture, you put your house up for collateral, you've got car payments, you've got medical aid payments, you perhaps, with whatever it is you're doing, you start employing staff, people are starting to rely on you, somebody might resign from their job that they already have to come and work for you in the job that you have. I've been in a situation like that. There's so much risk and there are so many unknowns about what is going to happen. And then again, I'll draw the comparison between walking out of the treatment center. How much is at stake? How much do you stand to lose? Are you confident or are you not confident in where you are in your program? Do you think that you know what you're doing? Do you know what you know what you're doing? What does your counselor say about where you are in your recovery? Do you believe him? Or do you think that this person is only in it for the money, which is the usual thing? People are trying to suck me dry. Have you listened to what your housemates are saying? Do you believe your housemates? Or do you think that your housemates are just saying the things that they're saying because they're trying to suck up to the staff? And why should you care what these people have to say anyway? What do they know? They're only 1 week or 2 weeks or 1 month or 2 months or 3 months sober. Who are they to give me any advice about staying clean and what is going to happen in my life and whether I'm going to make it or whether I'm not going to make it? So there are a tremendous amount of unknowns. When we're faced with these significant moments where we have no idea what the future has in store for us, what do? Because they are anxiety provoking. So stress, business stress. You don't know if your product is going to work. You don't know if your marketing campaign is going to work. Perhaps you're somebody like me who's really bad at traditional marketing stuff, going and seeing people and going face to face and face to face. And, how are you going to make this thing function? And then the entire responsibility for making this thing function is your responsibility. If you don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. So we're faced with a very interesting quandary. So let's take, for example, something like jiu-jitsu. Everybody knows what jiu-jitsu is. The guys use it when they do this UFC fight clubs. It's a very popular form of martial arts. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then there's just traditional Jiu-Jitsu. Jiu-Jitsu originated in Japan. Now, the interesting thing about Jiu-Jitsu, and it's one of the things that they've discovered with all of this UFC stuff, is that someone who has the technical proficiency in the art can take down somebody who is bigger and stronger than they are, and perhaps even somebody who practices more. Well, that's quite an interesting dynamic. Now, you can think for yourself, it's not a very easy technique to learn. If I'm not mistaken, you stay on your first belt for 2 years. And if you are consistent, I'm not sure if it's 2 years or if it's 3 years, and if you are consistent in the practice of your belt, that means you pitch up for practice weekly, you train, then you can move on to the next belt. So it's not a case of if you pitch up once a month, they're going to move you on to the next level. There's specific requirements for advancing in something like Jiu-Jitsu. That means that if you want to become a proficient fighter, you have to be really committed, you have to be really dedicated, you have to train, practice, get fit, and really be involved with what is taking place. Then you step into the ring. You step into the ring, and if that's your goal. Somebody like me, I like to do yoga. I'm not a violent person. I don't like fighting. When I watch UFC, it's a little bit disturbing for me. So I'll do a bit of yoga. Yoga is great for me. That's enough for me. But let's say that your objective, you've been practicing, you've been training, you're really in the ring, you're there. You want to test your proficiency to see how good you actually are. How good is your jiu-jitsu in comparison to somebody else's? Am I able, when it comes down to the crunch, to really do this? So you step into the ring with somebody else and you enter into a competition. You compete. The competition. It's a fight. You fight. Somebody might punch you and you have to continue in the bout, or obviously tap out, or get your ass handed to you, get your ass completely kicked. Now let's say that is something that does happen, that you step into the ring and you do get your ass handed to you. You then have to be at the dojo the next week, and the training has to continue. And that person that knocked your lights out will probably still be there. So what are you going to be, all resentful and sulky and passive aggressive? How are you going to respond to that situation? Again, I go back to my comparison with business. If you go into business, that's what it is. It's a fight. It's a struggle for survival. You got to push it through, and you got to make it work, and it has to happen. But there's a tremendous, there's something interesting, and please forgive me as using this as a metaphor. I've had two lady friends that practiced Muay Thai and did a few competitions. And both of them said to me that before the fight they started crying because of the intensity I'm not sure if it was before or while it was happening, because of the intensity of that engagement. All right? Now, as a man stepping into a situation like that, there's no ways that you exempt from any emotions that are different from that. In that kind of interaction, it's natural for something like that to happen. Like I say, please forgive me for using that as an example. I'm not saying that girls are crybabies when they when they fight Muay Thai, but it's just something. The one friend of mine was an instructor, and she was actually the one who said to me, it happens across the board. Guys, we're more, we've got more bravado. Maybe our egos are bigger, and we don't like to show weakness. But stepping into the ring, facing someone who might knock some of your teeth out, give you a black eye, perhaps knock your lights out completely. I mean, that's an anxiety-provoking set of circumstances. There's no ways you're going to just waltz into something like that and laugh it off. Unless you've been hit maybe in the head so many times that you've got brain damage. So we start our business, and it's exactly the same thing. We have to survive, and we have to fight to survive, and we're going to be facing major challenges, and we've got competition out there that might be bigger than us and might have been doing it for longer than we have. How do we survive under those circumstances? How do we win? Because isn't that the object of the exercise? Because think about it. If you want to go into a situation and test your skill against an opponent, there's a lot to be said for winning. A lot. Think about it. You can think about it out there on the ping pong table. Who's the ping pong champ? Everybody likes to win. Everybody loves a winner. The guy who loses is the one who gets teased. That's the way that it goes. There's affirmation to be had out of an exercise like that. But business is different. Recovery has got a different angle and a different element to it. Because recovery you can't see. It's an intangible thing. Business, they say that it takes 3 years to establish a business, which is rubbish. It takes 5 years. Right? They say 3 years just to make people who are starting businesses feel a little bit better. It takes about 5 years to establish any business. People talk about recovery. Get your first year. Focus on your first year. Stay clean for that year. That's what your objective is. Stay clean. It takes a while to recover from the damage that we do to ourselves with alcohol and drugs. Really, really, really takes a long time. If you are willing to work in a specific direction and try. So, coming back to the intangibles around doing something successfully. If you're a builder or a welder, perhaps even not something that I do or have any experience with, an accountant, somebody who works with numbers. I know from my experience, if I make something with my hands and I can see the product afterwards, I have a tremendous amount of satisfaction from something like that. Excuse me. I like carpentry. I've made all kinds of furniture. When I finish making a piece of furniture, it's an amazing thing. There's an affirmation to be had. When you're running your own business, there isn't something to see afterwards. There's a lot of unknown. Is this working? Isn't it working? Is this how it's supposed to be working? You might even have a degree in business and be in business and not even know if your business is working the way that business is supposed to work. Because you can only figure out how these things work once you start doing them. The exact same thing applies for recovery. Is my recovery working? Am I doing my recovery right? The only way that you can know that you're doing it is if you're in it and busy doing it and learning from that experience. You might have guessed the thing that I'm talking about, the object of the point of this discussion is stress. Fear of the unknown. How am I going to do this? What is going to happen? So, ideally we want people around us, and we're going to go, ideally, seek those people out and stay in contact with them and get them to guide us. Especially in the beginning, it's even more important. It's important the whole journey through to have people around you that can help you and guide you. The reason that I want to give why it's important to consistently have people with you to help you is something that can be explained a little bit scientifically. Now, I never did science in high school, and I'm not a scientist, but that's not going to stop me from trying to explain science to you anyway. There's a thing called the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics says that entropy will happen. It's the law of entropy. If you build a sandcastle on the beach, the chances that that sandcastle is going to collapse are stronger than that sandcastle staying the way that it is. Same with aging. There's nothing that we can do about aging. It's in the law of the universe. And the way that I understand this is that if you boil a jug of water and you put a jug of water on the table and you leave it, it will cool because that energy dissipates. So we in a universe where energy is constantly moving, where entropy is constantly happening, where the aging process is constantly happening. You might just be getting bigger, or you might just be getting older. It's the same thing. We constantly need people around us to help us and to guide us and to bounce ideas off. Just like in business, you want to learn how to be a billionaire? Speak to billionaires. You want to learn how to be a millionaire? Speak to millionaires. You want to learn how to stay sober and you want to learn how to recover? Speak to people who are staying clean and speak to people who are recovering. You hear it all the time, these mentorship programs, and how people are trying to boost these things because it works, the reality. Really, really does. But that still doesn't help us with the stress problem, the unknown, and dealing with the unknown. And that's where our perception comes in. And the constant struggle that we have with our minds to see the reality of our circumstances. And the example that I use is the Ash conformity experiment, the Milgram experiment, the Da Vinci experiment, where people are seeing something, but their perception about what is taking place gets impacted by whatever forces are out there at play. So, clarity of perception. Now, we look at what the 12 steps are saying. If we just look at the first 3 steps and what the first 3 steps are saying, cool. I know that I have this problem with alcohol or drugs. I know this to be true. Either I'm going to be using drugs or I'm not going to be using drugs. Secondly, I need to let go of what I think is happening. I need to give up my interpretation of what I think is wrong and try and find out what I need to know. Now, that's what the first 3 steps are telling us. I need to find a way to let go of my perception of life and my position in life. But that is a very, very, very difficult thing to do. That is not an easy thing to do. Now, you will have heard multiple times what the program is suggesting to us is that we do this daily. Step 10 says to us, our recovery is dependent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. If we maintain our spiritual condition, we'll stay sober. If we are able to clear our perspective, we will stay sober. And the only way to do that is to surrender and to let go. So, that businessman, and I include myself in that category, I let go of what is going to happen, what the future holds for me, through a process of working the steps, the impact that the past has had on me. And I try and do the very best that I can today. Because there's 2 things at play there. I have to fight for my recovery. But I also have to let go and allow my recovery to happen. I need to allow a power greater than myself to guide me and to take me where I need to go. So it's almost like a paradox. Bruce Lee said it perfectly. He said, the art of fighting without fighting. I love that statement. You know, you jump into that ring to compete and to succeed. Part of martial art practice is the spiritual side of martial art practice. That ability to not run around beating the crap out of everybody. To surrender, to let go. Just in closing, I've found 5 ways to work on letting go and to work on surrendering. 5 ways. Reading. So that means trying to find and trying to understand material that will teach me about the spiritual things that I need to know, which is letting go. Writing. Not something that I practice very well. But there are people who do use writing as a way of letting go of everything that is happening around them. Because you can't predict the future and you can't live in the past. Meditation, the 5th one, the 3rd one, sorry, meditation. Yoga. Throw yoga in there. Yoga is a very legitimate way of letting go. There's a lot of breathing. It's quite a skill and quite a technique. I'm not talking about, becoming a yogi and going to India and joining an ashram. That's not what I'm talking about. What's the 5th one? Talking. Speaking to somebody. Those are the 5 ways of achieving what is asked of us in step 1, 2, and 3. Not easy. Not easy. Make sure you understand surrender and where it fits into this whole thing, because it's all going to depend on your perspective. And the only way to keep your perspective clear is through applying surrender.
Serenity, to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Can we speed up that prayer a little bit? Just, it sounds so sad. It sounds like we're at a funeral. Bam, bam, ba-dun, dun, 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 dun.